The desert stretched endlessly before them, a sea of golden dunes under a sky bruised with twilight. Her name was Leela, a woman carved from hardship, her eyes sharp as the thorns of the Joshua trees scattered like ghosts across the horizon. She clung to the back of his leather jacket, her breath hot against his neck as the motorcycle roared beneath them, its engine a defiant growl against the silence of the night. "Ride me through the night," she had pleaded an hour ago, her voice trembling not from fear but from something deeper, something that burned like the stars above. He, Jace, a man with a past heavier than the bike they rode, had only nodded, his jaw tight. "I will," he promised, his words swallowed by the wind as he gunned the throttle. They were running not from the law, not from men with guns, but from something intangible, a shadow that clung to their souls. The desert was no place for promises, yet here they were, bound by one. The air was cool now, but the heat of the day lingered in the sand, radiating up through the tires. Leela's arms tightened around him, her fingers digging into his ribs, as if she could anchor herself to him against the vastness threatening to swallow them whole. The bike's headlight carved a narrow path through the dark, illuminating nothing but more sand, more emptiness. Somewhere out there, beyond the dunes, was a town called Salvation, a name that felt like a cruel joke. They'd heard whispers of it, a place where debts could be erased, where pasts could be buried. But the desert was a liar, and every mile felt like a gamble. Jace's hands gripped the handlebars, his knuckles white, his mind racing with the weight of her trust. She didn't know the whole truth about him, about the blood on his hands, about the men who'd sworn to hunt him down. Yet she'd climbed onto his bike, her desperation a mirror to his own. The night was young, but it was hungry, and the desert sky seemed to pulse with secrets. As the stars sharpened above, Leela whispered something he couldn't hear, her words lost to the wind, but her grip told him everything. "Don't stop, don't look back, just ride." 2. The motorcycle's rumble was a heartbeat in the dark, steady but fragile, like the pulse of a wounded animal. Jace felt the weight of Leela's body against his back, her warmth a reminder that they were both still alive, still fighting. The desert was a graveyard of dreams, littered with the bones of those who dared to cross it. He'd seen it before, rusted cars half buried in sand, skeletons of cattle picked clean by vultures, and once, a pair of boots with no owner, standing upright as if their wearer had simply vanished. Leela didn't know these stories, but she sensed the danger. Her fingers traced the scars on his jacket, not asking but wondering. They met 3 days ago in a dive bar on the edge of nowhere, her with a busted lip and him with a bottle of whiskey he hadn't touched. She'd been running from a man named Carver, a shadow from her past with a smile like a blade. Jace didn't ask for details, he didn't need to. He'd seen her kind before, survivors who wore their pain like armor. The road ahead shimmered under the moonlight, a faint ribbon of cracked asphalt that seemed to lead nowhere. Salvation was still a rumor, a name on a crumpled map Leela kept tucked in her pocket. Jace didn't believe in salvation, not the kind you found in towns. His salvation was the open road, the vibration of the engine, the fleeting moments when the world couldn't catch him. But Leela's plea had changed something in him, cracked open a part of his heart he'd thought long dead. The night air grew colder, biting at their exposed skin, and he felt her shiver against him. He wanted to stop, to build a fire, to ask her what she was really running from, but stopping felt like surrender. The desert didn't forgive hesitation. Somewhere behind them, Carver's men were closing in. He could feel it, a prickle at the base of his neck. The bike's fuel gauge was dipping low, a silent warning that their journey might end before the sunrise. Leela's voice broke through the wind, sharp and urgent. "Do you trust me?" He didn't answer, not because he didn't, but because trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Yet here he was, riding through the night for her, his promise a chain binding them both. 3. The stars were merciless, watching without judgment as the motorcycle carved its path through the desert's heart. Leela's breath was steady now, her fear giving way to a quiet resolve. She'd always been a fighter, ever since she was a girl dodging fists in a house that smelled of cheap beer and broken promises. Carver had been different, though, charming at first, his words sweet as honey, his hands gentle until they weren't. She'd escaped him once, but men like Carver didn't let go. She'd heard his voice in her nightmares, promising to find her, to drag her back to a life she'd rather die than live. Jace was her gamble, a stranger with eyes like storm clouds and a silence that spoke of his own demons. She didn't know if she trusted him, but she trusted the way he rode, fearless, focused, like the bike was an extension of his soul. The desert stretched on, its vastness both a threat and a promise. She pressed her cheek against his back, the leather cool against her skin, and let herself imagine a world where they reached salvation, where they could start over. But the desert didn't care about dreams. The bike hit a rough patch, jolting her back to reality, and she tightened her grip. The horizon was a thin line of indigo, the first hint of dawn still hours away. She thought of the map in her pocket, its edges frayed from her anxious fingers. Salvation was marked with a red X, a beacon of hope or a trap, she couldn't be sure. Jace hadn't asked to see it, hadn't asked much of anything, and that scared her as much as it comforted her. What kind of man rode into the unknown for a woman he barely knew? The kind with nothing to lose, she thought, or the kind with everything to prove? The wind carried the faint howl of coyotes, their cries echoing like a warning. Leela's mind raced. Carver's men couldn't be far behind. She'd seen their trucks in the distance at dusk, black shapes against the dying light. Jace had seen them too, his shoulders tensing, but he hadn't slowed down. The fuel gauge was a ticking clock, and she wondered if they'd run out of gas or luck first. "We'll make it," she whispered, more to herself than to him, her voice swallowed by the roar of the engine. 4. Jace's eyes flicked to the side mirror, catching a glint of light far behind them, headlights maybe, or just the desert playing tricks. He'd learned long ago not to trust his eyes in this place. The heat and the dark twisted reality into mirages. But the prickle at his neck was real, a hunter's instinct honed by years of running. He'd been a soldier once, then a drifter, then something worse. A man who did what he had to, no questions asked. The scars on his hands weren't from bar fights, they were from choices he couldn't unmake. Leela didn't know that, didn't know the names of the men he'd buried or the promises he'd broken. All she knew was his name and the weight of his silence. The bike's engine sputtered for a moment, a cough that made his heart lurch. They had maybe an hour of fuel left, maybe less. Salvation was still a myth, a dot on a map he hadn't seen. He wondered why he'd agreed to this, why her plea had hooked him like a fish. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at him, not with hope but with defiance, as if daring the world to break her. The desert was a crucible burning away everything but the truth. Jace's truth was simple. He was tired of running alone. Leela's weight against his back was a reminder that he wasn't, not tonight. The road curved slightly, revealing a cluster of rocks that loomed like sentinels in the dark. He eased off the throttle, wary of unseen obstacles. The desert was full of traps, sinkholes, flash floods, snakes that struck without warning. He felt Leela shift behind him, her hands sliding to his waist, her touch both a comfort and a distraction. "You see something?" she asked, her voice low but steady. He shook his head, not trusting himself to speak. The glint in the mirror was gone, but the unease remained. Carver's men were out there, he was sure of it now. They'd have trucks, guns, and a hunger for blood. Jace had a knife in his boot and a revolver tucked under his jacket, but those wouldn't be enough if it came to a fight. The only way out was forward, toward a town that might not exist, toward a sunrise that felt like a deadline. He gunned the engine, the bike surging forward, carrying them deeper into the night. 5. Leela's thoughts drifted as the desert blurred past, the wind tearing at her hair like a living thing. She'd always been good at surviving, at reading people, at knowing when to run. Jace was harder to read than most. His silence wasn't cold, but it was heavy, like a man carrying a burden he wouldn't share. She wondered what he was running from, what ghosts haunted his rearview mirror. Her own ghosts were loud tonight, their voices carried by the wind. Carver's face flashed in her mind, his smile sharp enough to cut. She'd stolen something from him, not money, not jewels, but something he valued more, his pride. She humiliated him, and men like Carver didn't forgive. The map in her pocket was her only leverage, a secret she hadn't shared with Jace. It wasn't just a map to salvation, it was a map to something else, something Carver wanted back. She hadn't told Jace because she didn't know if she could trust him, not fully. But his promise, "I will," had been enough to get her on the bike, enough to make her believe, if only for a night, that they could outrun the past. The desert was endless, but it wasn't empty. She saw shapes in the dark, cacti twisted like dancers, rocks that looked like faces, the glint of eyes that might belong to a coyote or something worse. The bike's vibration was a comfort, a reminder that they were moving, that they hadn't given up. But the fuel gauge was a traitor, its needle dipping lower with every mile. She wondered what would happen when the tank ran dry, when they had to face the desert on foot. Would Jay stay with her, or would he cut and run? She wanted to believe in him, in the strength of his hands, in the way he rode like the devil himself was chasing them. The sky was shifting now, the stars fading as a faint gray crept into the east. Sunrise was coming, and with it, a reckoning. Leela pressed herself closer to Jace, her heart pounding in time with the engine. "We're close," she said, though she wasn't sure if she meant salvation or something else entirely. He didn't respond, but she felt his body tense, as if he sensed the truth she hadn't spoken. "Six." The desert was changing, the dunes giving way to flat, cracked earth that stretched like a scar across the landscape. Jace felt the shift under the tires, the bike handling differently on the harder ground. The air was colder now, the night at its deepest, but he could smell dawn approaching, a faint tang of dust and heat. Leela's grip hadn't loosened, her trust a weight he wasn't sure he deserved. He'd made promises before, to brothers in arms, to women he'd left behind, to himself, and broken most of them. But this one felt different, heavier, like it could anchor him or drown him. The glint in the mirror was back, closer now, a pair of headlights cutting through the dark. Carver's men, he was sure of it. He pushed the bike harder, the engine screaming in protest, but there was nowhere to hide in this open wasteland. The map Leela carried was a mystery to him, a secret she guarded as fiercely as he guarded his own. He didn't need to see it to know it was trouble, everything in the desert was. Salvation was a name, nothing more, but it was the only destination they had. The bike sputtered again, a warning that time was running out. Jace's mind raced, calculating their options, fight, hide, or keep running until the tank gave out. None were good. He glanced at the revolver tucked under his jacket, its weight a cold comfort. He'd killed before, but never for someone else, never for a promise. Leela's voice cut through his thoughts. "There's a canyon up ahead. I saw it on the map." Her words were steady, but he heard the fear beneath them. A canyon could mean shelter, a place to hide, or a dead end. He nodded, trusting her instinct, and angled the bike toward the faint outline of cliffs in the distance. The headlights behind them were gaining, their light a blade slicing through the night. Jace's heart pounded, not from fear but from something fiercer, a need to protect her, to keep his word. The desert didn't care about promises, but he did. The canyon loomed closer, its shadows swallowing the stars. He felt Leela's breath catch, her body tense with anticipation. Whatever lay ahead, they'd face it together until sunrise burned the desert sky. 7. The canyon's mouth opened like a wound in the earth, its walls jagged and dark against the fading stars. Jace slowed the bike, the engine's roar softening to a growl as they entered the narrow pass. The air was thicker here, heavy with the scent of dust and ancient stone. Leela's arms were still around him, her breath warm against his neck, but her silence spoke of fear, of doubt. She mentioned the canyon from the map, but she hadn't said what lay beyond it, salvation or something else. Jace didn't ask. Questions felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. The headlights behind them had vanished, but he wasn't fooled. Carver's men were out there, stalking them like wolves. The canyon walls closed in, the path narrowing until the bike's tires scraped against loose gravel. Jace's eyes scanned the shadows, searching for an ambush, for a sign of betrayal. He didn't think Leela would lead him into a trap, but he'd been wrong about people before. Fuel gauge was a red warning now, the needle kissing empty. They'd have to stop soon, whether they wanted to or not. Leela's hand touched his shoulder, a signal to slow down. "There's a cave," she whispered, pointing to a dark hollow in the canyon wall. He hesitated, weighing the risk, then cut the engine. The silence was deafening, the desert holding its breath. They dismounted, their boots crunching on the gravel, and moved toward the cave. Inside, it was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the dry heat outside. Leela pulled the map from her pocket, her hands shaking as she unfolded it. In the dim light of a match Jace struck, he saw the red X marking salvation, but also something else, a symbol he didn't recognize scrawled in the margin. "What's that?" he asked, his voice low. She didn't meet his eyes. "It's why Carver's after me," she said finally. "It's not just a map to a town." Before she could explain, a sound echoed through the canyon, the low rumble of engines. Carver's men had found them. Jace drew his revolver, his promise to Leela now a vow to fight. The cave was a refuge, but it could also be a tomb. As the first rays of dawn touched the canyon's edge, he knew the night was over, but the battle was just beginning. 8. The desert sky was bleeding red, the sunrise a fire that burned away the last of the night's promises. Jace stood at the cave's mouth, revolver in hand, his shadow long and sharp against the stone. Leela crouched beside him, her map clutched like a lifeline, her eyes wide but steady. The rumble of engines was closer now, a pack of trucks cresting the canyon's edge, their headlights cutting through the dawn. Carver's men, 5 or 6, armed and hungry for blood. Jace counted them, his mind cold and clear, the soldier in him waking up. He'd fought worse odds, but never with someone like Leela at his side, someone worth protecting. She told him the truth in the cave, not all of it, but enough. The map led to a cache, something Carver had stolen and lost, something worth killing for. Salvation wasn't a town, it was a lie, a code for a hidden vault buried in the desert. Leela had stolen the map, and with it, Carver's power. Now they were here, trapped in a canyon with nowhere to run. Jace glanced at her, saw the fire in her eyes, and knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. "Stay low," he said, his voice calm but firm. She nodded, pulling a knife from her boot, her own resolve a match for his. The truck stopped, men spilling out, their shouts carrying across the canyon. Jace fired first, a warning shot that kicked up dust at their feet. The men scattered, returning fire, bullets ricocheting off the cave walls. Leela moved behind him, her breath quick but controlled, whispering directions from the map. There was a path through the canyon, a way out if they could reach it. Jace fired again, dropping one man, then another, his hands steady despite the chaos. The bike was useless now, its tank dry, but the desert had taught him to adapt. He grabbed Leela's hand, pulling her deeper into the cave, toward the path she described. The sunrise burned brighter, painting the canyon in shades of gold and blood. They ran, bullets chasing them, the map their only guide. Jace's promise held. He'd ride her through the night, and now he'd fight for her through the dawn. As they disappeared into the canyon's heart, the desert watched, silent and eternal, waiting to see who would claim its secrets.